Édes hazám, hogy kerültél ekkora bajba? Hol van a szabadság, amit úgy akartunk?
Legyen béke, szabadság és egyetértés. Történelmi győzelmet kell aratnunk, mert a következő kormánynak történelmi lesz a felelősség.
Ne a császár, ne a földesúr, ne a főispán, hanem a szabadon választott magyar parlament.
Magyarország a magyaroké, van kerítés, nincs migráns.
Polgár az, aki szabadon gondolkodhat, szabadon indíthat vállalkozást, szabadon választhatja meg a hitét, és nem üldözik, nem különböztetik meg a világnézete miatt. Polgár az, akinek jár a legjobb oktatás, bárhol is éljen az országban.
Ideje, hogy Kijev és Brüsszel is megértse, a mi fiaink nem fognak Ukrajnáért meghalni, hanem Magyarországért fognak élni.
Legjobb lenne Ukrajna megszűnne.
A napfény mindig utat tör a sötétségbe. A szabadság megléte fel sem tűnik, de a hiánya megöl.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Catherine Ricker. I'm Executive Director of the Albert Schenker Institute, and it is my absolute privilege to welcome you all to the next series in our Defending Democracy webinars. Thank you so much for coming to Defending Democracy, the Hungarian Election and the Future of Hungarian Democracy. Just a week ago, Hungarians went to the polls and we saw incredible results. We are so excited to bring this next webinar to you in our Defending Democracy series after looking at democracy efforts in Latin America, after looking at the democracy efforts in South Korea. Today, we get to work with a panel of experts to talk about the outcome of last week's Hungarian elections and what that could mean for all of us who are interconnected in worldwide advocacy for democracy in our countries. Today's webinar has incredible experts, and so let me introduce them to you, starting with Zsuzsanna Szelényi, a former Fidesz member of parliament. She's a guest researcher in residence at CEU Democracy Institute Leadership Academy, and she's the author of Tainted Democracy, Viktor Orbán and the Subversion of Hungary. We also have Thomas Melia. He served in the Obama administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor from 2010 to 2015, and subsequently as USAID Assistant Administrator for Europe and Eurasia. He has been involved in Hungary since 1990 with NDI, and most recently was an election observer for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And we are also joined today by Peter Krakow. He is a social psychologist and political scientist who serves as executive director of Political Capital Institute, which is a Budapest-based independent think tank, and as associate professor at Evitos Lorand University, where he teaches political and social psychology. His research centers on disinformation, Russian soft power influence, political extremism, and conspiracy theories, and he leads Hungary's EDMO-supported disinformation monitoring hub. And finally, we are joined with the Albert Schenker Institute Board of Directors President and AFT President, Randy Weingarten. Randy, thank you so much for opening today, offering some thoughts and engaging in our panel. With that, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much. And I really, really appreciate. And Zsuzsanna, I have been carrying around your book. We did all, we were supposed to be in Hungary for a democracy conference that we decided to postpone because we did not want, as Americans, to be used by Orban as, in any way to undermine the election. But Sujana made sure that I got the book and that she said, you must actually not only read it, but there's so much that we have learned from these amazing colleagues right now, from Peter, from Sujana, from Thomas, about what is going on, that we thought it would be important to take to ask our friends and our colleagues who we have been involved, who we have been in relationship with for a long time, to ask them to help us understand what is going on in Hungary, literally a week after this tremendous transformation of the world. But these three colleagues have been working on this for many, 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 many years. So I'm going to speak very little today. This is part of our series, as Mary Catherine said. We've created a series over the course of these last 6 months or so to actually dig deeply into what is happening in different places, in South Korea, in Hungary, and other places, so that we had an understanding, not just through the lens of American exceptionalism, but a real understanding of what is going on in different places in the world as we fight for democracy or fight encroaching authoritarianism. And this is part of that, but we are really lucky today because of who we have here, as Mary Catherine has, as you'll see from the questions that I ask. So for those who don't know, who are, and I suspect very few people who are watching this have not kept track of what has gone on in the last several months. But since we are taping it for a general audience, Viktor Orban got into power because he was actually one of the people who questioned the communism and wanting and actually was a speaker many, many years ago about democracy. And he created a name for himself because of that. He actually went to the university that he tried to close, CEU. But once he got into power the second time, and I say that very, very clearly, the second time, not the first time. First time he was defeated after he was elected. What he did was created this kind of encroaching authoritarianism that the current US government has studied and repeated to a T. And you'll hear from our experts about how he did that, the different things that he tried to take over, including media, the judiciary, universities. But what he also did was he became, in many ways, the godfather of the authoritarianism in the United States. Speaking at CPAC, we're now seeing that he funded CPAC, which is the basically conservative think tank with Heritage Foundation. He helped write Project 2025. You all saw at the end of this election that Vice President Vance was sent to Hungary to campaign for Orban and the Fidesz party. And we have AFT. We have always stood on the side of the Hungarian unions, of the Central European University in Budapest. We have tried to fight not only to keep it open, but for the accreditation in the United States. We have I actually associated myself with Peter Hundal, who is a teacher, and I spoke on behalf of him at the European Human Rights Court to defend his right to free expression. So this has been something that we have been watching with concern for many, many years and helping whenever we could as an American Union and as part of the democracy community worldwide with EI but and this is where I will stop to talk to ask the questions of the panel. Outsiders cannot do what people in a country can do. It's only people in a country that can actually decide for themselves what they want their country to be. And frankly, that is what Hungary did last week. And they did it in a way that was decisive, and they did it in a way that was meaningful. And Tom and Peter and Susanna are going to actually help us understand all of this. So let me ask my first question to Susanna, which is that TISA won 138 seats. I think that's about 54% of the vote. It's a super majority. Fidesz collapsed to 135 seats. I was shocked that Orban conceded that night, but just you've been watching Hungarian politics up close for decades. So how significant, like what happened that day and how significant are those results?
Well, thank you very much. And it's a great honor for me to talk to you and with you. And let me say just a couple of words, kind of introducing Hungary. So this election, which was fourth in a row in Viktor Orban's regime after 16 years, was very high stake. And it was highly consequential for Hungary and for Europe and maybe for a broader international community. Why? This was a regime which was a regime. So it was not just 15, 16 years of consecutive powers, but during these 16 years, Viktor Orban had constitutional majority, which this government used basically to shape the Hungarian state for their own face and then partisan interest. They did not respect its separation of powers. They used extraordinary centralization of power, captured state institutions of checks and balances. They used state resources, institutions, education system, cultural institutions, universities, and incredible state financial resources to propagate their ideology, which they call illiberalism, which is the exact opposite of liberal democracy. They also repressed media freedom and free access for information for journalists, made a significant administrative pressure on civil society organizations, independent journalists, and many organizations which were not directly propagating their so-called ideas. So Orban called this system a liberal system. And this is what he sold all over in the world to many other to-be autocrats as something, a sustainable power, obviously very tempting to copy by others. But obviously he could maintain this system so long because he captured the Hungarian state, because in our concrete case, election rules were rigged, constantly changed before every election. So every 4 years, the Hungarian parliamentary elections were organized in somewhat different legal contexts. So it was this victory of the opposition, which is overwhelming, was against every odds. Peter will talk later about all kind of foreign infiltration or disinformation, so I don't go into these details. But I would like to say a couple of words about what actually happened. So why the opposition, a big brand new movement established by a person called Péter Magyar, who was actually a member of the governing party before. He jumped out from this party 2 years ago and became a charismatic leader very quickly on, and basically rallied behind voters of every ages, but especially the younger generations, and over 2 years become more and more popular, and basically pushing Viktor Orban's political party out of power, hopefully for good. We, of course, don't know that yet. So, first of all, the problems we faced before, and I was member of parliament like 8 years ago, and there were a lot of efforts from the opposition to collaborate and create a coalition for to countering Orban's system. But we never succeeded because there was a leadership crisis. So until there is a clear leader who can rally various parties and political groups behind, there is no chance for real change, because politics is done by politicians, and civil society on its own is an important element of democracy but cannot win elections. The other thing is that Orbán was very lucky in the first couple of years. Hungary had an economic flourishing time after the 2008 credit crunch, and that was a kind of European trend. But with cyclic politics, basically the Orbán regime ate up its resources. So like 5 years ago, approximately, the Hungarian economy started to decline. And because at the same time, there was an extraordinary corruption for a certain group of people, in light of this, in light of the economic recession and also significant inflation, the corruption became one of the key issues of the last couple of years. It was also always on the agenda, but that was necessary that people feel that they are living worse than before. So together with this, inflation suddenly, or the corruption suddenly became a kind of hot issue. At the same time, we also saw that Orbán, you also know, played a global politician. So he entered to the global space and befriended with basically everyone, any kind of autocrats. He was meeting Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Donald Trump within 1 week. So he became one of the, he played for Hungarians that Hungary is bigger than it is, that Hungary is a global power, with Orbán, obviously. At the same time, his government neglected governing. So there was a massive problem with basically every public services after a while, and the opposition in the last 2 years specifically concentrated on local issues, avoided all kind of big issues, except pro-Europeanism was among the only important kind of identity issue, which was, it's also related to foreign policy. But basically, the opposition concentrating on everyday issues of what people were caring for, which were, as I said, highly neglected. There is also an issue which is important in Hungary after 15 years, 16 years, is that there is a completely new generation who entered to voting age in the last 2 elections, who did not accept this system at all. So basically, Orbán's voters started to age together with the party. And this is one of the major factors why Fidesz party lost. Another kind of deeper reason why the party lost is that whereas before the country was very divided between large cities and small settlements like tiny villages and rural areas, this was a very clear division. In the last couple of years, middle-sized towns and middle-sized cities become turning away from the leading party because too much of their autonomy was taken away. There are a lot of social research about demonstrating that basically this shift of the middle-sized cities, the middle class, from Fidesz towards the opposition was a meaningful change. So basically a new leader turned up, and there are 2 more things I'd like to mention. One technique, which is also, I think, important for Americans, that Péter Magyar, this new opposition leader, systematically avoiding entering the culture war. He did not went to the trap of Orbán, who always wanted to pull his opponents into the culture war. I am the Hungarian, you are aliens, you are traitors, you are foreigners. I am national, you are globalist. So this kind of culture war, which was so important for Fidesz dominance for many, many years, the new opposition leaders avoided. And this is an important learning point, I think, that entering the culture war, you cannot be successful. And finally, I'd like to say a couple of words that there was not a robust, but a systemic resistance over the 16 years. There was a lot of fascinating investigative journalists who recorded everything what happened. There were think tank institutions who made constant researches, academics who studied in details what was happening in Hungary and in other countries, and also civil society organizations. So there was a level of resistance which is now actually will be very necessary to reconstruct democracy in Hungary, because these are the organizations and authors and researchers who actually have the knowledge what went wrong, and they can help to how to restore democracy in Hungary.
My God, thank you so much for all of that. I'm like taking notes like a mile a minute, because it's really, Ann Applebaum and Tim Snyder, and frankly, so many of you have, given us a bunch of top lines before, but understanding what happened is also incredibly, incredibly important for us as we face our own, frankly, existential elections in November. When I say us, I'm talking about Americans. And I tease a little bit about American exceptionalism because I think we are all too focused on, we don't have enough humility in America, any of us. But I do think that learning from you and learning from this campaign is really, really important. Before I go to Tom, who's going to talk about, because I want to talk to you, Tom, about what you observed, because you were there last weekend, and I know you and Pat Kiefer, the head of our international department, were texting with each other or signaling with each other, or whatever app you were using. And she was sending me what you were saying about what you saw and what you observed. But I will not forget that night seeing on Instagram, I don't use TikTok, but seeing on Instagram, seeing on Blue Sky, seeing on, so much in Budapest of the young people celebrating. And, to the point that Susanna was saying about how that new generation said, no, that's not for us. And that gleeful celebration of taking back one's country, taking back one's liberty, taking back one's freedom, with Hungarian, flags all over. It was so inspiring to see that kind of robust demonstration of joy in Budapest that night. But Tom, you were in other places. Turnout hit nearly 80%, 79%. You were also, not that you must have been a child at that moment, that you were in Hungary in 1990 for those transition elections. You were an observer again. So there was a lot of questions early. Was there going to be, how rigged? It wasn't whether the election would be rigged, but how rigged would it be? I remember reading this article that came out before the election, saying that by Stefania Kopranche and Breja Res Makismovic, saying that they would have to win, that the opposition would have to win by 5% in order to win. But so there was a lot of trepidation about all of this beforehand. So what did you see? And what was your sense about that day and the run up to that day?
Well, thanks, Randy. And speaking of childhood, I'm the child of two AFT lifelong members. So that's where
Love that.
my education began in New York with the original UFT.
Love
So
that even more, my hometown local.
So I saw several things that may be of interest here. I spent most of the election weekend south of Budapest, driving between Budapest, Szeged, back north to Kecskemet, and mostly on election day I was around a town called Kiskunfilihaza. And that's a very conservative part of the country, held since 1990 by the same politician, Sándor Lezsák, who started life as a Hungarian Democratic Forum founder, and later, like a lot of conservatives in Hungary, gravitated towards Fidesz, or Fidesz gravitated towards the conservative part of society. Um, and uh, the media control that the government has established, that Fidesz established over these last 16 years, you can see it very clearly on the roads with billboards. All the big billboards that were doing political advertising was all two kinds of Fidesz ads. One was the heroic portrait of Viktor Orban navigating Hungary through stormy times. And the other were very negative, black and white, grainy photographs of Peter Magyar and interestingly, Volodymyr Zelensky and Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. And they were trying to portray Magyar as in cahoots with these Europeanists, from Zelensky on the one side to von der Leyen from Brussels. These grainy black and white photographs, like mugshots, to make them look like they're criminals trying to infringe on Hungarian sovereignty. And those and there were a lot of varieties of these negative advertising that was visible not only on billboards, but also on social media and on television throughout those days. I mean, imagine if 4 out of 5 television networks were Fox News or Newsmax, broadcasting a insistent line of propaganda, and there's 1 or 2 small outlets that are sort of real news outlets. And that's the case in Hungary. And Peter can speak more to the media landscape. But the important thing is that the news that people got, they knew what it was. This is interesting. Hungarians were able to see past the propaganda and see what the actual truth was, which is the corruption at the highest levels in the Hungarian government, Viktor Orban and his family and their friends getting rich and rich, mostly through stealing money from the European Union, that subsidies that come into Hungary. And then, of course, diverting state contracts for all kinds of things to their friends and relatives. And it was that corruption message that got through, that Peter Magyar campaigned on, as you just said, and that got through very clearly. There's an international echo of this yesterday's elections in Bulgaria, nearby Bulgaria, not too far from Hungary. The main message of the victorious party there was an anti-corruption campaign against the long-running government in power there. And so this anti-corruption message is resonating across Europe, I think, as it may well do here in this country. What else? One thing that was interesting was that we were visiting mostly polling stations in rural farm country in central South Hungary. And it was interesting that the Fidesz representatives and the TISA representatives were sitting side by side, and there was no tension, no fussing between them. They were collaborating in counting the ballots at the end of the day. They were joking and laughing throughout the day as we visited various polling places. There was no effort to create any false narratives about the election being stolen by one side or the other. Everybody was just waiting to count the ballots. And in the place where we watched the ballots being counted at the end of the day, the Fidesz representative there said he was disappointed but not surprised that his party had lost so spectacularly in that polling place, which previously had always gone to Fidesz, and nationwide as the news was coming in from around the country. So I think
I don't mean to interrupt you, but because you've had, as Mary Catherine said, you've had long experience in this part of the world. Did that surprise you? The kind of comedy between the TISA's representatives and the Fidesz representatives?
Not so much, really. I mean, my experience in election monitoring across Eastern Europe and in other parts of the world, in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, is that the people who stay at the polling place all day together and watch the voters come in and go out, they all know what happens in the polling place. There's no arguments because they all saw the same thing. The stories about malfeasance and miscounting always happens somewhere else. It's over there. It never happens here. And so if you can have enough monitors from the political parties, if they're everywhere, and I think they were in Hungary last weekend, and enough of an international presence to reinforce that, and there were at least 300 teams of international observers across Hungary last weekend, then there's no question about the process or the outcome. There's nothing to argue about. You'll know from our own experience in the United States that most of the stories about problems in election administration come from people who weren't at the polling place, right? And that's what didn't happen in Hungary because the people who were there saw the same thing. So that's why election monitors matter, and especially party monitors matter. They don't have independent civic monitors in Hungary like they do in some other countries, and that's been a small issue of contention that many people would like there to be more of a nonpartisan civic presence at elections in Hungary, but they don't really have that at this point. The other thing I would say about the campaigning, the negative campaigning, one of the recurring themes in the anti-Zelensky, I mean, the campaign was run as much against Vladimir Zelensky and Ukraine as it was against the political opposition. And what's interesting is that they recycled a slogan from previous elections. Fidesz did. In the past elections, they would have a black and white grainy photograph of George Soros with this crooked bony finger cackling, and the slogan was, "Don't let Soros have the last laugh." In last week's elections, they had a very similar photograph of Zelensky, black and white grainy photograph, cackling, and it says, "Let's not let Zelensky have the last laugh." So they recycled the slogan. One scary Jew last time. This time it's a scary Jew from Hungary or from Ukraine. So they recycled exactly the same trope to kind of scare people into thinking that Fidesz was, as they said in their campaign slogans, the safe choice. All of the Fidesz posters with the individual candidates would say, "Vote Fidesz, the safe choice." We're not going to get involved in the war in Ukraine.
Interesting. I had been in Hungary right before, I think it was in 1819. It was before COVID, I think it was and before the last election. And I was struck by all of those billboards that you talked about, like every corner about Soros, with the grainy pictures and with the, an exaggerated nose, and with the finger. And so I remember coming home and talking to people at the office and also friends about that propaganda. So thank you.
Yep. They just
So-
replaced one scary
One Jew.
Jew with another.
Yeah. Anti-Semitism. Peter, you and you just, the work that you did and still do at CEU, the work that you've done in terms of, really analyzing the disinformation and the misinformation and the propaganda and how you explain it to all of us has been, I've marveled at this for years. But you have been watching you've been watching this kind of disinformation and media control that Orban has done for over the 16 years. You have some thoughts about why it failed on April 12th, but I just want to lift up for our audience that's watching, that, you really have been one of the courageous political observers of all of this over a long period of time. And you have taught me a lot about detecting disinformation and misinformation in an AI world. It's even worse. But tell us about, why did it fail this time? Why did the state-sponsored disinformation, which has worked in Hungary for so long, why did it fail? And also lift yourself up, and if you don't, I will lift you up myself, because the independent media, the civil society, that role as that you all played is really, really important and is really, really courageous. And I want to say for the audience watching, the role that Peter played, the role that Shazana played, they are incredibly courageous because they have been acting in this part of the world. They are Hungarians. They have seen it for years and have acted to try and get us to a democracy in Hungary for years, much and have really been in harm's way for years. But why did it work this time, Peter? What did you see? Why did it work? And what was the role of civic society and independent media?
Thank you much, Randy, and thank you, Mary Catherine, as well. And also, I will follow up on some thoughts of Zsuzsa and Tom, and grateful to be here in this call and just to lift you up as well, all in the audience. I would say that one of the early signs for me that this regime might after a while crash under, civic courage was the teachers' protests back to 2023 against the so-called status law that have limited the ability of the teachers to, choose their own schools, to choose their own curriculum, and so on and so on, and practically also limited their abilities to do on strikes and to represent their interests together. So after 2022, when Fidesz won a landslide victory, a similarly big landslide victory that right now, Tisza won, one of the first measures of the Orbán government was to restrict the freedom of teachers, and I would say that teachers were reluctantly courageous, and I would also say that because thanks for the nice words. I'm running a think tank that was pretty much under attack by the Orbán government for years and years. But, it's like we were out in the spotlight. So we were commenting continuously. And to a certain extent, it provides you a certain level of safety because you are in the spotlight. Teachers, most of them are not on the spotlight, but they had the courage to stand up and to raise their voices against an increasingly oppressive government, and they did it at a moment where no one could really see that the challenger of Orbán and the political alternative is coming, because it started to rise in 2024, the Tisza as a movement. And I would start here to respond your questions on why didn't it work this time. So the first thing would be that generally there was in 2024, there was a scandal in Hungary, the so-called clemency scandal, which is like a pedophile scandal. I would not go into deep details, but that a person who helped, in a lot of sense, a convicted pedophile, were giving a pardon by the president with the assistance of the justice minister. And all of them are Orbán's people. The two female, faces of the regime, he replaced them, but this pedophilia issue for a country, for a moralizing political force, this moral crisis, I think, have led to a general credibility issue and non-credibility, and I think it led to a situation when Fidesz had huge problems in selling any of the narratives it wanted to. So it would be one issue, a general credibility crisis and a moral crisis. Second, a campaign strategy, and this is something that Tom have touched upon already. Campaign strategy focusing on enemies and geopolitics only, and ignoring totally the very issues that the voters were concerned about: corruption, healthcare, economy, and also to a certain extent education. And these were the very issues that Tisza was persistent to talk about, and they did not let the government to divert them, as Zsuzsa said, neither in the symbolic to the era of the symbolic wars, but nor to the geopolitical wars. And it's proved to be a winning strategy. Third, there was an alternative narrative and an alternative story, and Péter Magyar could, send some messages, and beyond the negative messages towards the Orbán government, which were, of course, obviously there, but there was a message of hope. There was a message of a new, better Hungary, while Viktor Orban and his campaign was only focusing on enemies and painting this dystopian, apocalyptic visions of conspiracy theories. Brussels and Ukraine are cooperating to pull us into the war and so on. And after 16 years, for 14 years, it worked remarkably well. But after a while, voters got fed up with this campaign strategy, and there was a fatigue towards this fear mongering. And it would be the fourth point, this fatigue. The fifth point would be preemptive communication, pre-bunking. And this is something that I think might be also music to teachers' ears, because this is something that we talk a lot about, we as social psychologists as well, but also teachers, how important it is, to teach against disinformation via preemptive communication, pre-bunking, and so on. Peter Magyar have always warned his supporters, they will blame me of this and that character assassination attempt. It's not true. They will spread conspiracy theories such as, and he listed, Russia will interfere into the elections and they will try to organize false flag operations and so on and so on. And he killed the stories in advance, practically in that. He had some geopolitical help from European intelligence services, who also helped to publicize some information on how Russia tries to interfere into Hungarian elections. And with that, it preemptively made a huge obstacle in the way of the real influence. Sixth point would be transparency, and this is where I think the investigative journalism, civil society comes into the picture. So I think the more than a 1.5 decade, work of anti-corruption institutions, of human rights institutions, of pundits, of think tanks, of investigative journalists writing about foreign interference, Russian connections, and so on, for 12 years, it seemed totally futile, because, you did it and there is one more election of Fidesz and so on. But persistence pays off. And this is, I think, one of the best readings of this story, that many of us, I think, who felt at some points that what we are doing is a bit of useless because no one is listening. Finally, when there was another political climate and a political challenger, then it finally started to matter. And the seventh and the last point I would raise is the free and independent media. So yes, it all were not possible if there was no real demand for an independent media. And what we could observe in the last 2 years is that the mostly online media that challenged the state-sponsored disinformation that was coming through more than 80% of the government-dominated media. So, but this 20% of independent media made a huge and heroic work in raising attention to the abuses of power, and also they did not do it by outright openly supporting Peter Magyar and his movements, but only by classical investigative and news journalism. And it was quite exciting to see that the very boring formats of analyst shows for 2 hours, one glass of water, and we are just talking for 2 hours. I mean, things that
as opposed to some coffee.
Exactly, that it just doesn't sell in today's media environment, and it had huge viewership. So when there is a growing political interest because of the possibility of a change, and I think it raised the interest for political issues to an unprecedented level. The turnout on the election was almost 80%, 80, which is something we have never seen, even something close to that, since the Hungarian transition. And maybe a very last remark, I think it's also Hungarian elections were an indication that geopolitics is not everything. So Viktor Orban could lose elections while he was supported by Russia, by the secret services, with energy policy, with diplomacy, and so on and so on. He was supported by the United States with nice words, spin dictatorship, and ideological push. And he was also supported by China, by Israel. So he had a powerful network of friends. And against all these odds, as you just said before, Péter Magyar could win elections. So political determinism and geopolitical determinism, I think, has failed a bit on the elections last weekend.
Yeah. I want to ask, I know, and we have promised we have a hard stop at 11, because I want all of us to be here at the same time and leave at the same time. So I've promised Shoshana that we will have a hard stop at 11. But I do want to ask a question that comes from the teachers union. But before I ask it, what was the role of zebras? Like zebras? Tell us how, I mean, clearly a symbol of joy, but zebras became a symbol of the campaign. Any of you, tell us a little bit about why zebras, as you all laughed.
I can tell you quickly the zebra, but we do not have zebra. I mean, Europe is not a continent of zebras. So the thing is that for a couple of years, there was a huge building site in the very center of Hungary, a very valuable manor house, like a castle with huge territories, was built under construction in a very highly luxurious way, which was owned by Viktor Orban's own father. And the neighboring fields and lands were all by Orban family members. And at some point, someone spotted a couple of exotic animals like zebras there. And well, of course, this was already a question of corruption, close to nepotistic issue. Orban's family building this own castle network in this vast land. And when zebras turn out, of course, this become a real fun point of how and demonstration of the absolute luxury. So I think the zebras become the subject of a lot of fun, but also kind of symbol of a nonsense luxury in Orban's near environment.
Thank you for the answer. I mean, and in the No Kings rallies that we have had in America, you have these amazing signs and you have people in outfits and that kind of joy. I am married to a rabbi, and she often says joy is an act of political and spiritual resistance. And so when I saw that little tidbit about the zebras, I wanted to raise it because I think the laughing and the humor is really, really important, as well as what it depicts. So I'm going to ask two more questions, one from the teachers union in Hungary that builds on what Peter said, and one that I'd like all of you to answer, because half of for this not to be a pendulum change again, then Magyar has to govern well, and there has to be a way that that hope that Peter talked about becomes some of a reality for the people, for Hungarians. So that's going to be the second question I asked. But the first question is, obviously, the teachers of PDSZ, they've identified, urgent attention, as have so many others. So what they have talked about, and Peter, I'm so glad you talked about how, and frankly, this is part of the reason I wrote this book, which is Why Fascists Fear Teachers. Immediately, what ends up happening is when autocrats get power and they're worried about whether or not they will keep power, who do they go after? They go after the educators and any real power that educators have, the power to collect bargaining. They go after the funding. They go after us creating a pluralistic environment. They go after us attempting to teach critical thinking. They start trying to erase books and history and things like that. So, you know, that's what the educators are worried about, because if we don't actually have some ways for there to be, you know, funding for salaries, for there to end the, you know, the ministers' performance evaluation system and in-service training, which is essentially indoctrination 101. Is this high on TISA's list? Is this something that they are thinking about right now? Or is this something that you think is foreseeable over the next couple of years, that the teachers will get their voice back and that education will become the kind of pluralistic mission and mission for democracy and for education that it ought to be? Any of you?
If you don't mind, I say a few words, but I do have to go.
Yes, I know
I have
that.
to speak in a few minutes in another
No
place.
problem.
So first of all, what I can tell that a major problem of the Hungarian education system at the moment it is not produces enough added value. So disadvantaged kids become disadvantaged through their education, and so this is what it should do. Corrected. This is a deep systemic problem. So there's a lot of things that I think teachers' education and preparing the Hungarian education system for something more innovative, creative, more critical will be absolutely necessary. And as far as I know, TISA's experts are aware of this task. It's something that requires over electoral cycles. So it's not something very quick to do, to basically prepare the teachers for new and innovative things. You know it very well, but I think this is an effort they have to do. Whether they will, I think hope so. On the other hand, despite this incredible concentration and centralization of the education system, indoctrination was not very successful in Hungary, and you can see this through all these young people who all voted against Fidesz, and basically the middle class, a lot of teachers. So I think that's not so easy to do. Even autocrats want to put their hands onto education first right away. Changing mind is just not so easy. But if you don't mind, I really have to go.
Yes,
and
we
I'm
know.
so happy that
Thank
I was
you
with
so
you. And
much.
Peter and Tom will be wonderful to continue.
Thank you. And
Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
keep
We
in
really
touch.
appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
So what I like to do is just end with that last question for both of you in terms of, you know, the future, which is essentially, I mean, it does appear obviously that, you know, Putin will be weakened by this. We can see in America, it has given us great hope. But the question really is for both of you who have so watched Hungary for so long and also understand what it takes to make change. You know, what's the tripwires for the Magyar government, both in terms of economic reforms as well as in terms of democracy reforms? What do they have to do? What will they trip over? And what, if anything, can we as outsiders do in terms of either helping, assisting, or simply watching? That's kind of like, I just want to end with both of you giving us a sense of what do you see in the future, and what, if you were guiding them right now, what would you be guiding them to do?
Keep in mind that this parliament that was just elected has now 3 parties in it, and they're all right of center parties. There's a very far right, hardline kind of nationalist party. There's Fidesz in the middle, and then you have this TISA party, which is not a coalition of all the other parties like previous elections saw. It's really TISA, and Peter Magyar has chosen all of the parliamentary candidates himself. They tend to be locally prominent people, business people, educators, et cetera. But they're not, it's not like a coalition of social democrats and liberals and et cetera. So there's 3 right of center political parties, which means there's no progressive presence in the parliament. So that will be interesting to see. That's very unusual, obviously. Now, many of the municipalities are governed by progressives, including Budapest and other sort of medium and large cities. So they're not disappeared from the political landscape, and they'll be there for the next 3 years until the next municipal elections happen at the same time as the European Parliament elections in 3 more years. So it'll be interesting to see. Now, with his 2/3 majority, the order of the day has to be unwinding a lot of the constitutional reforms that Fidesz enacted over the last 16 years to allow for the independence of those institutions to reemerge in the judiciary, in universities, and in economic institutions as well. But since we're running short of time, I'm going to give Peter the last word.
Yes, thanks a lot, Tom. And just very briefly, I would say that the big challenge here is going to be, and something similar that we could observe in Poland as well, that on the one hand, you have to deliver for your own voters, and it is going to be difficult. I mean, Orban has spent enormous amount of money in pre-election spending to buy the goodwill of the voters. It didn't work, but still it hurts the budget. And the promise from Peter Magyar's side is that, we keep everything that was popular from Orban's governance, plus we add our own program to that, which is going to be difficult, but at least to deliver on some of the promises, they need the EU funds. So they promised for their own voters, but at the same time, they have to deal with the constraints of the European Union and do some institutional reforms in order to get the EU funds that have been frozen because of transgressing some democratic norms and rule of law. And at the same time, both points would point towards, sacrificing democracy on the altar of efficiency. But at the same time, they also promised that there will be a more democratic process in place. And how to navigate between these 3 points, I think it is going to be complicated. But for that, I think for at the beginning of the governance, at least, they have this honeymoon period where I think, especially if they are successful in going after corruption issues, they might gain more time from the voters and possibly a bit more caution, and at the same time, some kind of they can keep up the trust, but it is going to be definitely difficult. And I think what you said, Randy, the beginning is that it was, an election where Hungarians could speak on their own voice, and it was not that much, the translation of international models into Hungarian, but something that was a genuinely Hungarian movement. I think it is true, and it also means that maybe at this point it is difficult to provide help from the outside. I think what is probably important is to keep up. I think the encouragement from outside, like during these events, that I think is even rather helpful. And I think the Hungarian teachers, for example, will definitely need, the praise for their courage and also for their persistence in the last few years.
Yeah, exactly right. So I just really want to say thank you to Susanna who had to leave, to Tom. Tom, not only for what you did now, but all of your service to the American people. That service has been really, the people who are in service of others do not get thanked enough. Teachers do not get thanked enough. Ambassadors do not get thanked enough. Those who worked for the State Department do not get thanked enough. I really want to thank you for that service. And Peter, also the service that you have done, which is to speak truth to power. What journalists do, what independent media does, what a social scientist does to analyze, to show, to connect the dots. So really thank you for that. And I also thank you for lifting up the teachers and the courage that they and so many everyday Hungarians have done over the course of these last few years, including the young people who said, no, not on my watch. I want freedom. that freedom that you saw on the streets the day of the election, that sense that Tom talked about, that the election observers or the counters actually said they are Hungarian and they want to have a country that where they saw each other. It's really just so inspiring to hear these stories right now. And so, for all of you who've been watching us, again, this is one of a series that we've done. I really want to thank you, Mary Catherine, and the Shanker Institute. Al would be very happy that we are doing a series like this, Al Shanker, because that was his sense of, you learn education for democracy, democracy in education. To have a democracy, you need to learn about democracy. And that is what the Shanker Institute has done. And for everybody who's watching, I hope that this has been a good educational experience for you. For me, it's been remarkable and inspiring to learn from all of these experts. For those of you who want more information, we will obviously put this video up, but also people like Ann Applebaum and Tim Snyder write frequently about what is happening, and so you can you can get information there. We will have the websites up. I already put up Susanna's book. I'll do it one more time before I leave for those of you who want to get that. And Peter Kreko has done so much in terms of his own think tank, the Political Capital Institute, which you can follow as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for doing this. And I'm turning it back to you, Mary Catherine.
Thank you so much, Randy. Thank you for leading us through this conversation. Zuzana, Tom, and Peter, thank you for your insights into this remarkable election. We are going to continue to watch what happens next and determine what lessons we can learn from the work of the Hungarian people. Thank you so much to all of you. You've been so generous with your time and expertise. For those of you who are able to tune in either live or on demand, please watch for future webinars in our Defending Democracy series. We look forward to bringing you more global, worldwide democracy stories so that we can work together. You can find past webinars on our website, shankerinstitute.org. And thank you so much for joining us today. Take care, everyone.